Chapter 5. Chance. Chance stared at the doorway long after Merribeth had left. So many conflicting emotions and thoughts tumbled around in his head. First, he couldn't believe she worked here. In high school, they had shared dreams of leaving Courage and taking on the world together. Of course, he had spoiled those plans for both of them, but he was surprised she hadn't continued her own plan. Second, he couldn't believe she was working in housekeeping. Merribeth was fierce and smart, and she'd always talked about running her own business. He'd had no doubt she could do it either, which made him wonder what had happened in her life the past 8 years that she now worked such a solitary job. Finally, he wondered about her son. What did he look like? Was she married? Happy? His eyes flicked to his computer. Being the manager, he could find her records. They might not tell the whole story, but they would give him an idea. Should he, though? Or would that be an invasion of her privacy? He bit the inside of his lip as his finger tapped on the mouse. Surprise! Chance nearly jumped at the sound of his mother's voice in his doorway. Guilt, as if he'd done something wrong, washed over him, and he yanked his hand away from the mouse. Mom, what are you doing back here? He'd thought after her impromptu drop-by that morning that he wouldn't see her again today, or at least not until he got off work. She sauntered in, carrying a white box and a manila folder. A large bag hung off her shoulder. You're off now, right? I have the paperwork for your house, and since I was bringing it over, I thought I would bring something to celebrate your first day. She placed the box down on his desk, tucked the manila folder in her bag, and then opened the lid of the box. A small brown cake with the word "Congrats" spelled out in green frosting stared up at him. Thank you? Chance wasn't sure what to make of his mother's sudden extra attention. He knew it had been years since he'd been home, but even when he'd lived here, he and his mother hadn't been that close. Perhaps it had been due to her overbearing personality, the one his father claimed as the excuse for his affair. Or maybe it was just that he hadn't had as much in common with his mother as he had with his father. At least, the man he'd thought his father was, until his selfishness had uprooted the entire family and Chance's view on everything. How about we share a slice and you tell me about your day? She opened up the bag that had been over her shoulder and pulled out 2 plates, 2 forks, and a knife. Chance glanced longingly at his watch. He'd wanted to go straight back to his room, where the jetted bathtub beckoned with the promise of soothing his sore and tired muscles. Butch had insisted he take one of the nicer rooms, as he was the manager, but even Chance had been surprised that the room had a jetted tub. He'd never used one, but he knew women raved about them. He was curious to find out if they lived up to their reputation, but it appeared that would have to wait. Rehashing his day, with his mother of all people, sounded about as appealing as watching annoying YouTube videos, something the youngest members in his unit had done and which he never understood. But she was here, and she had gone through the trouble of purchasing a cake. The woman couldn't cook to save her life, at least not anything appealing. He figured he could give her a half an hour or so. Sure, sounds good. Did you bring any milk? Her face pinched into something between shock and a grimace. Ooh, no. Did I forget to tell you that I don't drink regular milk anymore? Only almond or coconut milk. Do you know there are so many health benefits to avoiding regular milk? He did not know the health benefits to avoiding regular milk, nor did he really care. He liked regular milk. He liked the taste of it. He liked the ease of it. And he definitely liked the price of it compared to the alternatives that he often saw in the grocery store. Not that he ever looked that closely at them. In his opinion, if it didn't come from a cow, it shouldn't be called milk. Anyway, she continued, without missing a beat, I did happen to find some chocolate almond milk at the store. She reached into the bag again and pulled out 2 containers of almond milk, complete with a plastic straw glued to the side. Her bag was beginning to remind him of Mary Poppins, but not in a good way. He'd never been a fan of almond milk, or almond anything, for that matter. But his mother seemed to have forgotten that fact. He found that surprising, as he could remember dumping his bag of Halloween candy on the floor every year and picking out the almond joys to give to his father. He'd thought his mother had picked up on his aversion. She'd been in the room every year. But if she had, it didn't seem to stick in her mind. He still had to remind her that he didn't like almonds, and every time he said something, she acted like it was the first time she was hearing it. He would say nothing tonight. She likely wouldn't remember it anyway. His mother had always been obsessed with her diet. Even when he was growing up, she rarely ate normal food and had often stocked unpronounceable and unappealing things in the fridge. His friends had never wanted to come to his house after school because they knew that instead of chips or even fruit for a snack, they would find things like seaweed or tofu. Chance had learned to cook the basic necessities at a young age for that very reason. He was a wizard at boxed mac and cheese. Can you eat the cake then? She smiled and rolled her eyes. Of course, silly. It's a gluten-free, non-dairy paleo cake. Of course it was. He sighed as she sliced a large piece for him and put it on a plate. Suddenly, even the thought of eating cake seemed much less appealing, since it was bound to taste like cardboard. He hoped she wouldn't force him to eat the whole slice because he wasn't sure he could stomach it. So, is it everything you thought it would be? She asked as she cut a tiny slice for herself and placed it on her plate. Evidently, even gluten-free, non-dairy, tasteless paleo cake had to be eaten in moderation. Though she had abruptly switched subjects, Chance assumed she was asking about work. He shrugged and speared a small bite of the cake. I guess so, but I wasn't sure what to expect. I do know that I'm going to need to hire a personal assistant. There is just too much to do by myself. Her eyebrow lifted. Oh, do you have someone in mind? He thought about everyone he'd met earlier. Most of them were probably capable, but Merribeth flashed to the front of his mind. He knew she would be more than competent for the job, but should he even offer? She hadn't seemed exactly pleased that he was her boss. Not that he could blame her. Would she even consider being his assistant? I just met some of them this morning, and there are many more to meet, but I'm sure I can find a capable man or woman from among the employees. His mother tilted her head as she gazed at him. I don't know if you'd like having a woman assistant. You're so used to working with men, right? He was, and while he enjoyed working with guys, it might be refreshing to work with a woman, especially one with strawberry blonde hair who had been there for longer than he had and obviously had an eye for detail. He shook his head slightly to dislodge the image of Merribeth. Not only did she not belong in his mind, but she probably wouldn't return the feelings. After all, he'd told her he was incapable of love and left her right after graduation. Besides, she had obviously moved on as there was a kid in the picture. He should do the same. Is there a reason you don't want me to hire a woman? A look of mock shock covered her face, and she placed a manicured hand on her chest and shook her head. I never said that. I simply thought you'd be more comfortable with a man, since that's who you've worked with for so long. Chance hadn't worked with many women in his 8-year military stint, but there had been a few. and they had been some of the bravest, most amazing women he'd ever met or worked with. Of course, his mother knew nothing about them. They hadn't had many discussions about his military career. She hadn't even asked about his injury yet. "We'll see. There's obviously several more people to meet. So I probably won't get around to hiring anyone until next week as it is."
Just be sure you pick someone who can handle the job. There's nothing worse than hiring someone and having them fail to do what they claim.
His mother speared another bite of cake and pointed the fork at him for emphasis. He wondered if she had an employee in mind or if she were referring more to her ex-husband. It didn't matter. He neither cared nor wanted to continue the discussion. Instead, he nodded and hoped that his mother wouldn't stay long after the cake was finished. The bath still called to him, and exhaustion was blanketing him faster than he would have thought possible.
"Well, I'm sure you have some things to do, and I need my beauty sleep."
She pushed her barely eaten plate of cake to the middle of his desk and then reached into her bag, bringing the manila folder out again.
"If you can sign this, I can give you the key."
She placed the folder on the desk and then fumbled around in the Mary Poppins bag once more before holding up a silver key and wiggling it for effect. Chance grabbed the folder, careful to avoid dropping it in the food, opened it, and scanned the papers inside. The contract appeared to be in order and allowed him to take custody of the house tonight. He probably wouldn't sleep there as everything would need to be unpacked, but at least he could let the movers in and then spend another relaxing night in his hotel room. With a quick scribble, he signed the papers and handed the folder back to his mother. She smiled, tucked the folder back in her bag, dropped the key in his hand, and stood.
"This has been fun. Let's do dinner soon so we can catch up more. Maybe Butch will join us."
Dinner with his mother sounded bad enough, but dinner with her and his new boss, who also happened to be her current boyfriend? He honestly couldn't think of anything worse. Besides, with his mother's dietary restrictions, he doubted wherever his mother picked would have decent food, especially good meat, and he loved meat. "Sure, I'll have to see what I have going on at the lodge, but I'll try to get some time." She sashayed around the desk, circled her arms around his shoulder, and gave him an awkward side hug.
"It's so good to have you home again. Enjoy your new place, and let me know if you need anything else."
Though the words made him feel more like a boy than the man he was, Chance patted her hand and nodded. Ignoring the words would be much easier than trying to explain how they made him feel. As she disappeared out the door, a huge feeling of relief blanketed Chance, followed by guilt. He shouldn't be relieved his mother was gone. After all, she was the only family he still had since his father had left. But her personality had never felt so overbearing before. He wondered if she had always been this way, or if he were just more jaded than he had been before. It didn't matter. That was a thought to explore another time. Tonight, he needed to meet the movers and then return to the hotel room and the jetted tub, soak in a nice warm bath, and crawl into bed, in that order. He had another big day tomorrow.